The anti-corruption lobby group Open Secret says it's not clear how deeply some of the country's banks may be implicated in economic crime. It's after the US government leaked documents revealing how Monitor international banks are helping criminal syndicates to launder money. Open Secret's researcher Mamelo Musiana joins us to discuss this further. Very good morning to you. I was quite shocked to read about how some of the biggest banks in the world, JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank, Bank of New York, Mellon, and the trillions of money that has just passed through them. How are we doing here in South Africa when it comes to that?
Not that well. I think we've seen the exact same thing, even with the same banks that are implicated in this new leak, the FinCEN leak. We've seen the same thing with the banks here and how they facilitated state capture. But we've seen very little accountability or responsibility. I think we saw how Nedbank facilitated the Transnet tranches, and we've also had the same thing with FNB and Standard Bank, but they have not answered questions around their role with the STINA and how they facilitated those transactions. And funny enough, even HSBC was implicated in the Transnet scandal here in South Africa. So this is not something that is new to the banking sector. They're a very central player in international money laundering and the global financial economy.
I mean, obviously, banks shift money for people that they can't identify, so they're not going through the processes that are in place in order to achieve transparency. How do you impose that if they're not going to even respond to investigations underway? I mean, many of these big banks were found to have been complicit in these dealings in the past, and it hasn't bothered them at all because obviously the sums of money are massive.
Yeah, I think we're finding that the repercussions for committing these crimes are not meeting the profits. And the thing is, this is now just seen as the cost of doing business. If you think about HSBC, in 2012, they were fined 1.9 billion. That is so minuscule to how much they make even just in a week. And they'd rather actually just take the risk of doing business with some of the most dirtiest organizations and then actually pay the fine because the profits are much bigger than the penalties. And we have seen it multiple times. And even in South Africa, if you think about the state capture case, we saw the banks go to the Zondo Commission and act as victims rather than complicit actors. And they were able to take that stance because they are impune in this country. They have a lot of impunity.
Okay, how significant is it then that when it comes to Gupta's money, we've seen some sort of FICA-led movement to release information about the accounts that they have in the States and in the UAE? Will that make a difference? Will this elicit some sort of change?
It should. We hope that the MPA in particular is trying to get mutual legal assistance with the US, and that they try to make sure that there's asset recovery. Because one of the important things is not just that get justice, but it's also to actually get that money back into South Africa. I think the fiscus needs it, and it's important that the FIC has actually taken the initiative to do this. It's a very important step, and we hope that this is the beginning of them being more open as well in their work. I think one of the things that we're particularly troubled by is we still don't know the extent of the role of the banks in state capture because we're unable to access whether there were suspicious activity reports filed and whether those suspicious activity reports were acted upon.
Let me ask you quickly, how would you get access to that? What needs to be done?
Well, unfortunately, one of the things that keeps banks able to do this with no accountability is because their banks operate on secrecy. And one of those, and it's an important thing because people want their confidentiality to be respected. But I think one of the things that the banks need to start implementing is that when they're dealing with politically exposed persons, PEPs, is file the suspicious activity reports. And when those suspicious activity reports are filed, the bank should act on them, freeze those accounts. And I think it's important that those issues are disclosed to the public, that there is actually, if a big person who's obviously been alleged to be in corruption, they should say, we have frozen the accounts of this person due to large sums of money being moved. We do not know the source of the money. I think that is something that is important to people, especially in a country where we've seen so much corruption go unchecked.
You're right. I mean, we don't know yet the extent of it when it comes to banks, but how should banks be punished if fines are just not enough?
I think the fines should definitely get way more. And I also think that we need to see bank execs be charged personally and individually. And we also need to see much bigger culpability and liability for what they've done. I think in this instance, you have banks facilitating what is coming from the FinCEN leaks is that they're facilitating terrorism, that they're facilitating acts of drug trafficking. I think that they should be charged with those crimes as well, because the effects of that is that these kinds of groups that commit terrorism or that commit drug trafficking would not be able to do so without banks. So banks are an important actor in that whole scheme, and therefore they should be charged just the same as blue collar criminals. I think white collar criminals get away with way more because of the professionalism attached to the kinds of work that they do and the kinds of crime that they do.
They absolutely do. Mamela Mosiana, good to talk to you. I mean,